Hello and welcome to this episode of Gin and Tonic. This time we're going to be talking about theater of the mind versus miniatures. So most of you have probably played on some sort of a battle map of some sort, whether that was a sheet of paper or a terrain that someone built out of Dwarven Forge or Whiz Kids, or maybe your dungeon master has a 3D printer, or maybe they just draw on paper. You've played on a grid. Others have played where there's been nothing but a character sheet and a handful of dice. And I really find it funny because we were discussing this script earlier this week as I watched the DM layer drop this exact topic as well.
So instead of pretending like that didn't happen and we didn't know about it, we're just still gonna talk about it, even though it's already been done.
It's been done. I'm sure there are countless YouTube channels that could talk you through the pros and cons of each, and there are pros and cons to all of them.
I mean,
If
I've gone as simple as a piece of paper with some cereal stacked on it.
Yep,
And then once a guy
and
is
that
fairly
works.
wounded, you eat one piece of the cereal, and then there's one piece left, and that's a pretty wounded dude.
That's another way to do it. Just count it as hits. And before anybody gets their knickers in a knot over, their we only use theater of the mind, or I have all of this lovely stuff. There is no right or wrong way. Do what works for you. So which one do you think we should start with, Megan? Should we start with the pros of virtual tabletops, full-on maps, which take on a whole bunch of different forms, or theater of the mind?
Let's start with virtual tabletops. I think we'll get through that pretty quick. Maybe. Knowing us, not, but we can try.
We can absolutely try. So virtual tabletops have a lot in common with full-on maps, especially full-on maps, in that if you can find the right map online, and there are tons of maps online and lots of people sell maps, if you can just drag and drop it in, pretty easy once you learn the technology.
Yeah, I think that
But
is a
if you
stopping point for a lot of people is the actual technology and learning curve to use a virtual tabletop. It can be pretty steep.
like I've used Roll20 before and was able to build some maps, and I did enjoy doing it. But I found that I personally felt more like I was a system manager at a computer than I was a dungeon master. So that wasn't my forte. For those of you that do like it, power to you and enjoy. But it's a fair bit of work to get it to work properly.
It looks really cool when it all works properly. Like, it looks really amazing. But for me, I just kept getting intimidated by it, and I've been told, well, just pick one thing that you want it to do. I'm like, but I don't want just one thing. I want it to do all the things, and I don't know how to make it do all the things, so then I don't make it do any of the things, and I don't use it. Although that just could be my ADHD brain. All or nothing.
That's okay, because despite that spiel, I am in the camp of maps.
I do like maps.
But I love my maps because maps, if done correctly, can tell your players an awful lot. And it doesn't need to be the best map in the world. Medieval maps were, if you want it to be historically accurate to what would have been available, it's not going to be perfect. Things are going to be, within a couple miles of this location, you'll find this tower. It's drawn on the map. But it also tells the players that to get from the city they're in to this tower that they're supposed to go to, it's going to be about 3 days. So I highly recommend, if you have any sort of artistic skill, grab yourself a piece of graph paper and draw. Or I painted my last campaign map because I got bored and painted a map.
Hey, why not? I do weird things when I'm bored, so painting a map would be a step up, I think.
For those of you that don't want to do it by hand, there are all sorts of programs out there that can help you build world maps, or local maps with towns and villages. Um, I have heard great things about Dungeon Fog for battle maps. I know I've used a couple different world builders that were completely free on the internet. And sometimes it's just fun to go find a world builder or a map maker and just give it some parameters and click generate and see what it gives you.
I can see myself losing hours of my time tomorrow now that I have that idea.
Oh yeah, you just like, what happens if I make the elevation points really high and really low and make the ocean level really high? Oh cool, we now have an island, a bunch of islands because everything else is underwater.
That's pretty cool. Anyway, we should keep moving on.
We should most definitely keep moving on. Getting into maps and minis, and this is the one that definitely has the widest area to cover, because you've got the guys that have spent thousands of dollars on Dwarven Forge or WizKids or 3D printing out all of these dungeon tiles. Or you have a crafting dungeon master who has painstakingly learned how to make dungeons and tiles and terrain and built it and put it together for you. And so help me God, if you walk the other way from the thing that's set up on the table, your GM should smack you.
I would put that down. Actually, that's a pro and a con. The con is the money and the time spent making and or painting everything. But on the pro side of thing, it looks amazing. Most people are familiar with the starter D&D adventure, The Lost Mine of Fandelver. I hope I'm remembering that right. It's been a
You
while.
are.
But I'm pretty sure it was on YouTube, someone crafted by hand an entire freaking battle map of one of the caverns there. And it was like 3 dining room tables long. It was insane. It was huge.
That's actually a complaint I did have about the starter set, is that it the maps were not playable in any way, shape, or form. For me, I like maps that I can play on. So
Yes.
I went out and got the big sheets of paper with the 1 inch squares that like you can hang up on the wall.
Yep.
And I bought like 100 sheets for like $17 or something like that. And my wife and I sat down and we, square by square, recreated the first several maps from the Lost Mines of Fandelver so that we could put our miniatures on them.
Yes, because that is the thing. Like the maps that are with it are a handout to give you an idea, but they're not actual of playable size. That reminds me, I do need to go and get some more of that grid paper though. Eh, I'll remember at some point.
The, the downside to that is that I have sunk hundreds of hours into designing these papers and maps, and despite telling myself, "Oh yeah, I'll reuse this. Oh yeah, I'll reuse this," I never did. I I I had dozens and dozens of maps hanging on the wall, and I reorganized them multiple times in order to make them more accessible, and I still didn't use them.
Yeah, I mean, I've got boxes of 3D printed stuff that I really need to paint. But what did I do instead? Oh, I printed off a Hydra because I wanted to.
Hey, you know that some of my tiles are still bright red from when they came off the printer.
Yeah.
So yeah, players, if you're GM has gone through the effort of drawing out a map or paying for a map to be printed or building some tiles and stuff, say thank you to them. That's a lot of setup and takedown and a lot of money and time. But for the players that have trouble with imagination, or for battles where precise tactics are necessary, or the group has a strategy they want to employ and you want to give them down to turn by turn how you're going to go through it, that's great. Like I once had a party where I had to create all of their areas because their strategy was send in the fighter, and then once the fighter was surrounded, the three rogues would kill everybody with arrows, giving them advantage, which then triggered a whole bunch of sneak attack damage.
Well, that's pretty cool, though.
Oh, it was a deadly firing squad. But it's not the best for, I've got a random encounter and it popped up. Like, you're not going to build that. I actually subscribe to the train of thought from Professor Dungeon Master over on Dungeon Craft, where he has his ultimate dungeon terrain, and all it is a grid. His spins, and I built a spinner similar to it. His is round, but he just has, I think it's a 13-inch disc that you just drop in what you need and take it away. And you don't have to go that far, but just having a generic battle board that you can throw a few bits of terrain in, or a few walls, or a few bad guys, and
Yeah.
show them spacing, but you don't have to include every detail. We're playing a game where you can shoot fireballs out your butthole. So I really don't think that tasking your players to use a little bit of imagination. It's possible.
Yeah. It's possible.
Which then leads to what were you about to say?
I was just going to say pretty much the same thing. And then there's Theater of the Mind.
And Theater of the Mind, I was absolutely intimidated by Theater of the Mind when I first started GMing.
I
I
still
learned
am.
how to play on. Oh, it's absolutely horrifying until you have the proper exposure. I learned to play on maps that were on graph paper, and we had tiny little squares we moved around. And then when I started GMing, I always had all these maps. It wasn't until I got into a game with a dungeon master who didn't use any maps. His whole game was Theater of the Mind, that I kind of got to see how it worked. And it's great for random encounters, or the party is moving through a dungeon cave system and they've been traveling for 2 miles underground, and there's a goblin patrol. There are 2 goblins there, and your 5th level party is going to descend on them. You don't need a map for that.
No.
They're probably going to die before they get a chance to do anything. And you can also generalize. It allows for some really great sequences to play out. You've got a warehouse full of stuff, and there's a fire burning, and the bad guy jumps up onto one of the rows or the stacks of stuff that line along the wall, and he starts running down, and the rogue does some crazy acrobatics and pulls themselves up top and is running after them. You could grid that out and move it 30 feet, and then move it 30 feet, and then move it 30 feet. That takes a lot of the drama out of it.
Yeah, that gets a little bit too much work and not enough play.
Yep. In that case, the rogue is running. Your rogue is chasing after the bandit king. Roll me an athletics. Roll. Is the guy getting away? If they roll poorly, based on the target number, he gains 10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
If not, he loses 10 feet. Now you've got to make a certain number of successes before a certain number of failures. Skill checks. Or skill challenges, sorry. All back to 4E, which I never played, but I hijack a whole lot of great ideas from.
I have heard there's a lot of good ideas in there.
There are a lot of good ideas. I think it was more than it was supposed to be. And apparently, I've heard there was supposed to be a virtual tabletop launched with 4th edition, which is why it being so tactical wasn't a big problem. But they never released the virtual tabletop for it. So,
Hmm.
slight problem there, I could see.
Yeah.
So yeah, theater of the mind can be intimidating, but it has so many good applications and can let you do some really dramatic and cinematic things without having to build a map that is 3 dining room tables long.
I don't have that many tables or that much, well, maybe that much floor space if I really push things back. But
Yeah, that's
I also have
that's
cats,
just it.
so putting anything in reach of cats is just asking for them to just start playing with it.
Oh, it definitely is. Or, if you have young children or you can't leave stuff set up overnight, like this becomes a problem. I personally recommend a hybrid to anyone where
Mm-hmm.
you can have your battle, like have a generic battle board. If you don't build it so it spins, which has a lot of really great pros, we'll get into that another time, or just go watch UDT from Dungeon Craft. He'll explain it better than I can. Um, but you have a generic battle mat, battle board, battle something on the table, maybe a few bits of scatter terrain, and then you can draw out the rooms if you need to, or you can just theater of the mind it as you need it.
Yeah, it all works.
It does. And you know what? Do what works for you. If you try theater of the mind and you just suck at describing the things, that's okay. Go back to buy yourself a generic dry erase board and draw the rooms out that way.
Yeah, it works. In the end, like you said, you do what works for you. Everybody's a little bit different. Everyone's going to have a different idea here and there.
Do what works for you and your table.
Yep. And leave the rest behind.